All right. Thank you all for coming to the Environmental Water Network today. My name is Nicole. I'm the Healthy Rivers Project Associate with the Nature Conservancy, and I manage the California Environmental Water Network. I see a lot of familiar folks here. It's great to see you all. And for those of you who are new to the network, we're a group of environmental water practitioners working to remove barriers to streamflow restoration. And one of the ways that we do this is by coming together for monthly informational webinars and discussions. And the Environmental Water Network was created in 2019 by the Salmon and Steelhead Coalition, which is a partnership between the Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, and Cal Trout. I'm really excited for today's webinar. We have an exciting update about the North Coast Water Availability Tool. Jen Kara with the Nature Conservancy, Ben Kerr with Boundary Spatial, and Mia Van Docto with Trout Unlimited have been working on the creation and development of this tool, which is an online platform that can be used to simplify and streamline water availability analysis in Northern California's coastal streams. Some logistics of the webinar today. They're going to go ahead and give the presentation, and then we'll have time at the end for questions and discussion. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to the team.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for making time to dig into this with us and talk more about the California North Coast Water Availability Tool. I'm Jen Kara. I'm a scientist with the Nature Conservancy and our water program, and I'll be co-presenting today with Ben Kerr from Boundary Spatial. And Boundary Spatial were our contractor, technical contractor, and did all the technical development for the tool. And the Nature Conservancy and Trout Unlimited were project partners in soliciting funding and managing the project towards building the tool. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through a couple of things today. We're going to give you an overview of the project and talk a little bit about what the motivation was for developing a water availability tool. And then we'll get into an introduction to the tool and its specific elements. And Ben's going to present on some case studies and a brief demonstration of the tool. And then we'll have hopefully about 20 minutes at the end for discussion and questions. Next slide, please. So for the first part, the project overview and motivation, we're going to talk about why did we develop a water availability tool, who was involved, and a little bit more about the specific policy, the North Coast and Streamflow Policy, also called the Policy for Maintaining In-Stream Flows in Northern California Coastal Streams. This is the area that we developed the tool for in this initial pilot. Next slide, please. So why did we develop a water availability tool? I think most of you on this call are probably pretty familiar with images like this, unfortunately. We know there's a fundamental problem in California and the North Coast, in particular in our salmon and steelhead streams and rivers. We're seeing that dry season flows in many perennial streams drop to critical levels, or they dry up entirely in the dry season, in part due to numerous water diversions for uses such as farms and residences. And in a lot of these watersheds, though water might be plentiful in the winter, water demand is typically in the dry season, and that often exceeds the limited supply at that time. So we end up with conditions like are shown here with disconnected pools. Next slide, please. So to address this kind of temporal mismatch in supply and demand, there are quite a few partners, including us, who are working with water users on voluntary projects with the goal to increase local winter water storage capacity and shift the timing of diversion from the dry season to the wet season instead. Next slide, please. So the Salmon and Steelhead Coalition Nicole mentioned earlier, it's a partnership between Trout Unlimited, California Trout, and the Nature Conservancy. And our main objective is to work together to increase stream flow in California's North and Central Coast watersheds. And a key strategy to that end is to provide technical support and funding for voluntary actions to improve in-stream flows for fish and wildlife, and to improve water supply reliability for water users. We know that these kinds of, we call storage and forbearance projects, where we're increasing winter water storage and then in exchange asking water users to forbear during the dry season. These kinds of projects often require new water rights in order to shift diversion from summer to fall. And so one of the key things that we do is provide technical support, and that often takes the form of helping water users acquire such water rights. Next slide, please. So why a water availability tool? In many cases, getting a new winter water right requires a fair amount of analysis and paperwork. So acquiring that kind of winter water right that permits storage, particularly in the area that's governed by the North Coast and stream flow policy, can be a long and expensive process. And given the kind of current situation with salmonid populations, we really make an effort to find ways to be as efficient as possible with these projects. And we've used implementing these projects as a way to better understand the process and identify pinch points and opportunities to speed it up. And developing a water availability analysis is one part of this process that can take a long time. So figuring out how to create a tool that reduces the time and expense around water availability analysis became a priority for us, which led to this project. We see that the benefits of developing such a tool could be that the applicants and reviewers are using the same data, the same assumptions, the same analytical processes. We were hopeful that it would help reduce time and expense to prepare them, and also reduce time and expense on the agency side to review water availability analysis. And that it would also help ease the project scoping and development of storage and forbearance projects, or really kind of any project that involves water rights in the North Coast in stream flow policy area. Next slide, please. So Ben's going to get into a lot more detail on this later, but just briefly, what is a water availability analysis? It includes two parts. The first part is a water supply report, which is an analysis of the supply and cumulative demand for water at a proposed
Hello, this is Cindy.
Proposed project location and downstream senior water rights. And then the second part is a cumulative diversion analysis, which is the detailed analysis of the deliverability of that water relative to maintaining the variability of in-stream flows. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that the tool could be helpful for increasing the ease of project scoping. So even if you don't need a full water availability analysis to support a new water right application, we see that there are a lot of ways that folks might find utility in the tool anyway. One way that we see that this tool could be useful for folks, even if they don't need a full-blown water availability analysis, is that it's a tool that allows you to access water rights information in a watershed. So if you needed a list of water rights holders in a particular watershed of interest, you could step through the process, and that is one of the outcomes of the tool that you could use. The tool also develops stream flow estimates at ungauged locations. So that's an important part of the water availability analysis, but we see that that alone might be useful for folks who are interested in better understanding stream flow at ungauged locations. So just to flag that, even if you don't need a full water availability analysis, there are parts of this that I think have utility to a lot of other folks. Next slide, please. So kind of in short, we wanted to create a free and open access online tool that would produce water availability analysis following the requirements of the North Coast and Streamflow policy. The project was funded by the Wildlife Conservation Board in the fall of 2021, and they will have funded it through September of 2025. The tool was launched in earlier this summer, so it's up and available now for use. And we developed the tool in kind of a user-centered design group framework. So we really wanted to develop a tool that would be useful not only to water rights applicants and consultants who might be working on water rights applications, but also to state water board staff and other agency staff at CDFW and NOAA, for example. So as we were developing the tool, we worked really hard to include representatives from all of those groups to make sure that we were designing a tool that met their needs. And I'm going to hand it over to Ben now.
Thank you, Nicole. So I'll start again there. I hate it when sorry, I was on mute. So I'm going to start with a bit of a deeper dive through the policy itself, and then move into sort of a guided tour for how you would create a water availability analysis for a project that you're interested in. So the goal of the in-stream flow policy for the North Coast is to maintain those in-stream flows for the protection of fishery resources, while also minimizing the water supply impacts on other beneficial users of water. So there's a dual objective there. One, don't impair senior water diverters access to water, and secondly, don't impact the ecosystem requirements for water either. And the focus in the development of the policy was really on the anadromous salmonid population, so of the coho and trout populations along the North Coast. So the principles were really designed to ensure that any new license or permit that issued won't affect the in-stream flows needed for spawning, migration, and rearing, or impact the flows needed to maintain the natural flow variability. So there's two sets of analyses. One is focused more around the low flows, and then another one is focused more around ensuring that those peak flows, which are useful for channel maintenance and whatnot, are preserved as well. So the way that the policy is implemented, it establishes guidelines for evaluating the potential impacts of a new water diversion on the stream hydrology and biological resources. And in doing so, it provides protective measures related to the season of diversion, that people are permitted to take water, the minimum bypass flows that must be preserved in the stream, as well as the maximum cumulative diversion. So in my experience working with policies designed to maintain environmental flows, I would say this is by far the most complete treatment of ensuring that any new water rights that are approved don't have unintended consequences on the resource itself or other existing users. So I'm going to go through on the overview of the California North Coast Water Availability Tool to talk about the scope, the process, and also the benefits along the way. So starting with the geographic scope, This map shows with the darker or with the thicker colored black outline, the geographic scope of the policy. So it includes Marin and Sonoma counties in their entirety. It also includes parts of Napa, Mendocino, and Humboldt counties. So it's really all of those coastal streams from the Mattole River up in Humboldt County down to San Francisco, as well as the coastal streams entering San Pablo Bay. So as Jen described, or as Jen introduced at the start of the presentation, there's two parts of a water availability analysis, and the first part that I'm going to go through is the water supply report. So what this step does is evaluate the unappropriated water supply at the project point of diversion, and also at the location of downstream senior water rights. And there's criteria in the policy that tells you how far downstream you have to go, but it's essentially uh, as far downstream as until your impact becomes negligible on the availability for the senior water right. That once you're completed with the water supply report, that gets submitted to the state board. And then what's provided back to the applicant is a determination of the upper limit of anadromy. So how far up, towards your proposed point of diversion do anadromous salmonids go. The stream class of the stream segments downstream from your point of diversion, either to a flow regulated main stem river like the Russian River or to the ocean. And then there'll also be specific points of interest which are selected and provided back to the applicant for use in subsequent analysis in the cumulative diversion analysis process. So the State Water Board, in consultation with CDFW, determines these things and selects the point of interest only if the water supply report demonstrates that there may be remaining available water. And that's an important distinction here, is that if you pass the water supply report test, it doesn't mean that you are going to get whatever right that you're applying for. It just means that there is a indication of a suitable amount of water at a macro scale there. So if that does look like there's a suitable amount of water, then you take that information that was provided back to you from the state board, and then you enter into the cumulative diversion analysis process. So that includes a daily flow study. So you're actually looking at the time series of flows projected at these points of interest and analyzing things like what the impact of your new proposed diversion is on February median flow, what the impacts are on the natural flow variability. And at this point, you can choose either to use regional criteria, where these minimum bypass flows and other characteristics are defined based on an algorithm essentially that was developed, or if you have site-specific studies performed at your project point of diversion or at other points of interest downstream, you can also use those for establishing the flow criteria that needs to be met. So the benefits of CWAT are that applicants and reviewers use the same data, assumptions, and analytical processes through their evaluation of a project. That transparency and repeatability is very important, and something that's sort of embodied through everything that we did in producing the tool. So full transparency into the methodology, full transparency into how the analysis is applied to the data sets, ideally so that somebody could recreate the same numbers that come out of the tool through their own independent purposes if they so desired. By automating this analysis, though, it vastly reduces the time and the expense to prepare and review the water availability analyses. So, reasonably, you can get to a quick assessment of whether or not a project is viable within the span of a morning, whereas it would likely be a few week process to evaluate individual projects otherwise. So there's a huge benefit in that initial screening of viability for projects through the automation of the analysis. And I just wanted to highlight that although the tool was designed to support the flow enhancement projects that Jen described at the start of the presentation, the policy applies to all sorts of purposes that people would want to acquire a right for. So, there's nothing stopping people from using this tool to use it for other projects which have demands for water as well. So we'll just now move into the sort of guided tour of the application itself. So part one, the water supply report. So step one, what this screenshot shows is a selected point of diversion, and that's indicated with that blue sort of fork in the road pin marker. And it also selects the stream reach, which was selected for analysis. So there's a two-step process in sort of defining where your project point of diversion is. One, placing the pin on the map, and two, selecting the stream reach that project would be withdrawing water from. The second step in the process is actually to provide information about the characteristics of your demand. So that's the season, the start and the end date of your proposed diversion period, the total volume of the diversion, as well as the rate. And then if you are proposing site-specific criteria, you can also propose a minimum bypass threshold for your new project at this point. You aren't required to do so unless your project is outside of the policy season. But if your project is within the policy season, you could also elect to use the regional criteria for evaluation if you didn't have a site-specific study. And I just want to highlight one thing here, which I sort of alluded to in those comments that I just made. The North Coast in-stream flow policy is designed only to evaluate new diversions within the period of December 15th to March 31st. We've adapted the analysis to support evaluating projects outside of that time period as well. So, we anticipate that for a given project, there may be different diversion rates at different times of the year. Those can be addressed through the use of the tool. Each separate diversion rate would be used to define a new diversion season. So if you had multiple different different sort of diversion scenarios, you would produce multiple different water supply reports through this process. The same goes if you're proposing diversion both within and beyond the policy season. You would need to split those into two separate projects essentially, because outside of the policy season, you can't use the regional criteria for evaluating your project. So once you get past that point of defining your demand, the next step is to identify which gauge that you would like to use for the evaluation of your project. So we facilitate the selection of a gauge with a recommendation engine that compares your project watershed with the watersheds of existing stream gauges which meet the test for the policy. So the test considers things like, a relatively unimpaired, suitable period of record for the gauge. So all of those gauges that meet that criteria are available here, and the top 3 ones, based on their similarity with your project watershed, are recommended for you to choose from. You're also able to choose a different gauge if you have local knowledge around its appropriateness and it wasn't prioritized through the algorithm in the tool. If you elect to use one of the ones that's not proposed as a candidate, there's a requirement to add some justification there to support why you selected that one. Otherwise, if you select a candidate one, there's essentially justification that comes out, which uses the automated analysis as the justification for that selection. So once we have the supply side sorted out, we need to turn our minds to the existing cumulative demand. So what this step looks like is a review of the senior diverters within your project watershed. So this is also the step that Jen highlighted in case of, you don't necessarily want to produce a whole water availability analysis. If you get to this step in the tool, what you can get is essentially a list of the senior diverters in your watershed. This data comes from a few different data sources available from the state board, and it attempts to enrich those data sources into something that provides a more complete view of the diversions that are either authorized or in the case of riparian rights, the diversions that have been historically taken. All of that information is provided into this table, and the process at this point is essentially for the user to download the table to their computer and then to review and evaluate the information on those senior diverters, potentially augment it with additional information that they're required to collect from the state board. There's a lot of work ongoing towards improving the availability of digital data around water rights, but there still are some gaps in that availability at this point, which must be sort of filled in by the user or the proponent of a project. So once you do that, you download it, you make your revisions, then you upload that data back into the tool, and then you have your information on senior diverters that can be used going forward. So for the purposes of the water supply report, that's essentially the end of the road for how you interact with the tool itself. The next step past uploading the senior diverters is exporting the outputs of the analysis. So the policy itself defines a whole bunch of requirements that need to sort of be included along with an application. So it's very specific in terms of what needs to be on the maps, what sort of tabular information needs to be provided, what charts need to be provided. All of those requirements are fulfilled with the output package that's exported from the tool. What the tool doesn't do is write your project description for you. Say, why do you want to use water there? What purposes is it going to be for? The tool doesn't know anything about that. So this information that comes out, you'll need to sort of integrate with your other information that you have about your project itself. Any backup studies or supporting material that you have would need to be combined with sort of the technical information that gets produced from the tool. Oops. And then from there, once you've sort of combined the technical outputs with your other qualitative description around the project itself, they'll submit that to the state board. They'll review the project, and then, as I mentioned previously, provide you back with things around the upper limit of anadromy, the stream class, and the points of interest for subsequent analysis. And that subsequent analysis all happens in the cumulative diversion analysis portion of the application. So when you access the North Coast Water tool, you're required to log in before you're able to create a project. And the reason that we did that is we anticipate there's going to be some amount of time delay between when you submit your water supply report to the state and when you get that information back, allowing you to move into the cumulative diversion analysis part of the process. So by logging into the application, we can essentially save your project, and then in a few weeks or months or however long it takes for the state board to get back to you, you can then log in again, open up your project, and then move on into the cumulative diversion analysis process from there. In the case where perhaps there's some revisions to make to your water supply report, you can also step back into that process and make adjustments as needed, and then proceed on to the cumulative diversion analysis. What this screen shows is the creation of one of those points of interest. So in this case, the point of interest is a existing senior diverter. So that orange circle identifies point of interest number 1, which is associated with that AWE1 senior diverter. And in the process of defining this point of interest, you can click on the map, modify the longitude and latitude through the entry boxes, define the stream class, indicate whether it's at or below the upper limit, or at, above, or below the upper limit of anadromy. You also identify what the next closest upstream diverter is, so you ensure that this analysis location is properly sorted in the hierarchy of water rights, moving from upstream to downstream. And you'll do this process for each of the points of interest that were identified. From there, you need to determine whether you would like to use the regional criteria or only site-specific or alternative criteria only. If you elect to use the regional criteria, you can still modify things past this point, but if you select site-specific or alternative criteria only, the tool will not provide you with any sort of proposed criteria based on that regional criteria. Similar to how we reviewed the senior diverters in the water supply report step to correct or augment the digital data with any additional information, you have an optional step in the CDA process to do a similar thing for the streamflow estimates that are going to be used for the subsequent parts of the analysis. So if you want to unimpair the streamflow record that's going to be used, this is the part where you would do that. And what you would do is download a similar set of senior diverters, review and verify information about the volumes of their diversion, and then provide that data back to the tool where that water would be essentially added back into the streamflow estimate before subsequently being removed again. This is not a required step to do. We understand through the development of the tool that in many cases people don't unimpair the gauge record. So if you simply want to use the gauge record as it is, you can choose to use the observed streamflow data. I would say if you choose to use the observed streamflow data, you'll end up with less water on the whole in your assessment for a project. So, from an environmental protection standpoint, using the observed streamflow data creates no potential for, additional unintended impacts for analysis based off that. And then moving past that point, it's really just interacting with the outputs of the tool. So it provides an evaluation of the impacts on the minimum bypass flows and natural flow variability, taking into consideration your proposed project and the existing flow variability and cumulative demand downstream. And just like the water supply report, the cumulative diversion analysis part of the application provides you with all of the relevant information intended to support a CDA to be submitted to the state board as well. So the same caveats apply there. It's not going to write the application for you or make it look pretty or do anything like that, but it will provide you with the technical information for you to take and incorporate with your proposal. And that just reiterates the type of things that you'd want to include in that proposal. And then I'm going to take a couple minutes just in a couple minutes to show you what the application looks like itself, but I wanted to quickly just touch on a few gaps with regards to how this application works at present. So as I mentioned earlier, the availability of complete and reliable data on senior water diverters is critically important for doing these types of analysis. The state board's working towards a release of Cal Waters in the second half of 2025, which will replace ERIMS, which is where the majority of this water rights data comes from. Um, at present, some critical parts of information are missing from the digital data. Most significantly, the minimum bypass flow for senior diverters, which is that flow that must be maintained at those locations for a senior diverter to take their water. Um, Hopefully, some of these gaps will be closed in the coming years as Cal Waters goes into production and the availability of data from that system is built out. But until such time as the entire archive of water rights is essentially translated into that system, there's still going to be a requirement for people to review, digital records of scanned documents and whatnot to piece together some of the complete picture around the senior diverters. Streamflow records as well too. That slide that I showed, the gauges available for extrapolating streamflow at your project POD. There's not a ton of them. So more streamflow data is always better. And even though many years of data would have to be collected to provide the ability to augment the existing set of gauges, which do have data, it's especially critical, especially in the smaller watersheds where there's maybe even less relatable gauges to use for a project. The policy itself also provides for the ability to use model-derived streamflow estimates. So there's also potential in the future, perhaps, to augment the sort of adjustment of streamflow record approach with model-derived estimates of daily flow at project locations as well. And on that note, I'm just going to stop sharing and quickly bring up the tool itself. Will just be a couple more minutes before we get into the question part. Okay, so this is the homepage of the California North Coast Water Availability Tool, or CWAT for short. The URL is northcoastwater.codefornature.org. We get started by simply clicking the Get Started button here, but I did want to point out two sections before we get to that point. There's a methodology section, which is available from the header bar here, as well as a tutorial. The methodology provides as elaborately as we could, like full documentation of all of the data sources and all of the methods which are used to analyze that data. The tutorial itself is essentially like a guided walkthrough to recreate a water availability analysis yourself without having to go through the effort of doing things like verifying senior diverters in a watershed. So just click on the Get Started here. We're then presented with the login screen. I'm going to continue with my Google account here. And as we log in to the tool, we're presented with a whole bunch of information, which is intended to provide that jumping off point for a new user. And then down below, we have both the existing projects that I have in my profile, and also the ability to start a new project. So just in the name of time, I'm not going to start a new project. I'm just going to go through and take a look at an existing project that I created a few weeks ago. Just got to wait for this to finish loading. So what we'll see on this page is essentially what I showed in those screens during the presentation. So the title of my project is June 3rd AM. So this was a project which was designed for a training session that we delivered. The first step to choose a point of diversion. This part is locked here as we've already re-uploaded our senior diverters. But at this step, what I would do is choose my point of diversion here, click that on the map, and then there would be another button here to say choose stream reach. So then I would choose that and then click on the stream reach itself. The season of diversion section, you flow through subsequently. You can fill out the proposed diversion period, the total volume of diversion, the minimum bypass flow. I'm not proposing a project outside of the policy season, and I don't have alternate bypass criteria, so I'm going to select no at that point. Candidate gauge selection. So we can see my project stream reach watershed is this orange one here with this is the fork in the road diversion section. We can see that I'd selected candidate 2 for this analysis, which is this pink watershed here on the Garcia River. The senior diverters section I've already downloaded and re-uploaded that. So that's all complete. And then we're taken right to the download package section here. So we tried to make this as simple and easy to step through. I do want to highlight the process of evaluating those senior diverters is not necessarily going to be quick and easy, but we've tried to make the rest of this process of interacting with the application as smooth as possible. So I stepped through into the CDA process from there. And as I mentioned when we were walking through this, there's not quite so much to do in this part of the analysis. The analysis that happens is a lot more complex in the background, but really the only interaction from a user's perspective at this point is defining these points of interest, making sure that they're in the right spot in the hierarchy of water rights, choosing whether you're going to use the regional criteria or not, and then really you just jump right into the thresholds calculation. So this provides the ability to choose whether you're going to use that minimum bypass flow from the regional criteria or whether you're going to augment it with the user provided one. And then you're done. So the information that's output in the tool here provides a high level evaluation of whether the project contributes to in-stream flow reductions. There's specific criteria like the number of days which the unimpaired flow meets or exceeds the median base flow, both before the project as well as after the project itself. It assesses the percent change in those values, takes a look at the proposed project's contribution to modifying the instantaneous peak flows, which are useful for channel maintenance. And it does that for each of the points of interest that were identified. The only difference in accessing this information, as you might be able to appreciate, there's a whole bunch more data that's included in this part of the analysis. Actually too much to generate and process on demand. So to acquire the results of the CDA, you simply hit the email CDA button at the bottom, and then in 2, 3, 4 minutes, the package will show up in your email. And I will wrap things up there, just to ensure that we've got enough time for questions.
Thank you, Ben and Jen. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute and ask away.
So maybe a quickie question if I could, but maybe this isn't easy. I've just been trying to follow online with the tool and just checking out in an area for how it might work by picking the upper Russian River. So I wasn't looking for the water analysis, but when I picked something in the upper Russian, it said you can't do this because it's already completely appropriated. Was that an expected response, or should you be able to get that list of what the senior rights diverters or the senior rights across the upper Russian would be?
That's a good question.
Sorry. I was just picking an example that I sort of knew something of, but
I think, thanks for the question, Neil. So because we designed the tool to conform with the policy has specific requirements around how to treat water availability analysis in fully appropriated streams and in flow regulated main stem rivers.
okay.
And so you're basically not allowed to submit water availability analyses and new water rights applications using this tool in those places. So I think that's why the tool is not allowing you to do that. It's an interesting question though, because, you know, to better understand the water rights in those areas, it might be helpful to be able to access some of the information, at least the senior diverters there, even if you're not able to do the full analysis and use it as a basis for a submittal of a new water right application. So,
Yeah.
something to
Sorry, that was just the quick example I picked while working through it for something that I was thinking of, but yeah.
Yeah, I can add that I know for the Russian, the water board has designed models specifically for the Russian River. And so they want you to use those models when doing a new water right request.
Okay.
But it does, Neil's quite right in that it breaks the promise that I made that you're able to retrieve that report for any watershed in the region. So that's, yeah, I think not the case in the upper Russian anyways.
And it is working. I shifted it to the East Fork above Lake Mendocino and and that suddenly was able to, I think it's giving me a list, but I was just trying it as we were working along. Thank you. Very interesting.
To your point, Mia, does that mean if the Navarro model is done that we won't be able to access? Is that no?
No, that's different.
Okay.
I think the Russian is flow regulated as well too, and there's that plays into the applicability of it.
Great question. Looks like Candace asked a question in the chat: to what degree were or could illegal diversions be included?
That is a really good point. I don't know if we've had any conversations around that from a like a viability perspective. You could add missing water rights in the process of reviewing the senior diverters. I would know less about how the state board would consider those or whether they would want you to do that. So
Yeah, that's not part of the process you go through when you conduct a water availability analysis, but in the model, you can, when you edit the table of water rights, you could add in missing water rights that are not there. But I don't know that the water board would want to approve that type of analysis because it's not part of their policy.
But you could, if you just were pursuing a project out of curiosity and you wanted to kind of better understand the potential cumulative impacts of diversion, you could add them in.
Kind of the other direction or the opposite of that, where there's some really big paper water rights in a watershed that aren't actually being used. Does that show up in the model at all?
It does. So the senior diverters information that is provided to the user comes from ERIMS and other state board data sets. And so it uses, for appropriative water rights, it uses the face value that's provided from the state water board. There are, we made sure to make so that you could make changes if needed. For example, I'm not sure that the water board would permit if a appropriative water right is being used and it has a face value, but it's being used at much lower than its face value. I don't think that they would permit you to make that change in a water availability analysis for a new water right application because the policy requires you to use the face value. However, there are cases, for example, where an applicant may have submitted an appropriative water right application that's pending. And while that appropriative water right application is pending, they were advised to also submit a statement, a riparian statement of use, so that they can report use under the pending appropriative water right. In a case like that, we have interacted with the board and they're willing to allow edits in the senior diverter table so that you don't have a duplication in that case of use. And you can zero out the face value for the pending application and make a note in the comments that that water right is being used under or being reported under the riparian statement instead. So that's an example of a change you can make to the face value in the analysis, but I don't believe the water board would permit the reduction of a paper water right from the face value if that appropriative water right is actually being used.
Great. Looks like Rue has a question.
Yeah, I wondered, we're doing some, because of the Eel River Powder Valley situation, we're looking at what's going on between the where Dry Creek runs into the Russian all the way up to the lakes. And so is there a way on the maps to identify reaches where there is no excess water availability? There isn't any. Rather than look at, do the search like Neil did, is there some way to just identify areas where it's already either allocated to the maximum or in some cases over allocated?
I think that's a good question. I don't think that you can do that currently with the tool. Sorry.
No, yeah, no, not presently. You can't get a visual indication of where streams are fully appropriated. I believe there is a data set that does exist, which could potentially be incorporated to do that. Like it's fully appropriated stream something is the data set, which we could potentially incorporate just to provide that visual indication of what streams have been designated that way.
That would be really useful for a number of reasons, for everybody downstream even.
Yeah, there's also, I think, so you can get access to the list of legally designated fully appropriated streams in California. But I think there's probably another case where a stream may not be legally designated as fully appropriated, but may be appropriated to a level already that would not permit the the permitting of new water rights in that reach. And I'm wondering actually if the supply and demand analysis and model that the State Water Board put together for the Russian would be a more valuable tool to identify those reaches kind of out at the gate. I think it might be, I don't know, Mia, if you have thoughts on this, but it might suggest reaching out to folks who are working on that model in the Russian at the State Board. They might be able to help you with that question.
Okay, well, just generally, I think it's helpful, not specifically relative to the Potter Valley situation, but generically to know which reaches are already fully allocated for other reasons, rather than having to search reach by reach as Neil was doing.
All right, awesome, everybody. Thank you so much. Looks like we're at time. Such an exciting new tool to add to our toolkit. Just want to briefly share that we have some upcoming webinars coming up in August. Bromwood Stanford, the Nature Conservancy, will provide an update on the functional flows calculator, which quantifies each of the 5 functional flows associated with the California Environmental Flows Framework. And on September 19th, we'll be joined again by Megan Quinn with American Rivers. She'll provide an overview on their California Active 50 project, which is prioritizing the feasibility of dam removals. And in October, we'll provide an overview of our well ordinance and ADF modeling work. Thank you so much, and please let me know if you have any questions or feedback about how the network can best serve you and all of your work.
Thank you very much. Very
Thanks, everybody.
informative. Mhm.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, thank you, everybody. That was a great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.
Hi, Nicole.
Bye.